Hey, welcome to Jwlhyfer's Gothic Bohemian Salon. I have a little bit of a cold, so I might sound a little bit scratchy-throated, but I hear that's sexy, so hopefully it'll prove to be so in my case. So, I've been asked to talk about how the different subcategories of goth came about, and I have a theory about this, which I'd love to share with you, so I will. And this is how I remember it happening, and for anybody who remembers it a different way or has a different opinion, I fully support your differing opinion and appreciate that you may have experienced something different. The Gothic subculture is a big subculture, and it spread across many countries and cities, and the movement, or whatever you want to call it, has changed and grown so much since the beginning that, I'm sure that everybody has a different interpretation for what's, occurred. So this is just my take on it. So the first time that I noticed any sort of categorization in the Gothic subculture, well, I mean, you could say that it was there at the very beginning, in a way, if you want to talk about the distinction between death rock and goth, or gothic, because it was gothic, not goth, for a really long time. But it did very quickly become mostly gothic pretty much everywhere, except for in Los Angeles, where you had death rock, as far as I believe, as far as I know. So the first time that I noticed there being any sort of subcategory type of situation was when clubs started playing industrial music as well as quote-unquote gothic music. So you would have, on the flyer it would say gothic industrial, and then after a while it was gothic industrial ambient, or dark wave, gothic industrial dark wave, and then it might say, 80s goth, or, goth classics, or, something like that. So I think the rift or separation occurred around that time, because then you had, like, cyber goths were basically the more industrial style, and goths were the more romantic, what's called now Romantigoth, I guess, style, the more Victorian thing. What I used to love doing, though, is I guess you could call me a Romantigoth at that point, because I wore very elaborate costumes, big bustle gowns with top hats, and very, very involved things, hats and trains, and just high collars with lots of ruffles, and just all kinds of really intense stuff. The kind of stuff that people wear a lot of nowadays, but you didn't really see people wearing these elaborate costumes back then. So I like to think of myself as pretty unique and somewhat of a trendsetter. So I used to like to, in all my finery, go into the industrial room and dance to that music, because I actually really, really liked that music. And I used to get a lot of really odd looks from people dancing in the industrial, part of the club, because I was dressed in the Romantigoth sort of look, or whatever. Then another kind of rift that I noticed. See, I think of it as rifts, and maybe that's not a good way of thinking of it, but I sort of feel that every time you make a subcategory, you're creating a smaller box to shove somebody into, which I don't like at all. I just think, we're all goths, and we should leave it at that, and why, get into all these intricacies of, creating all these tiny, tiny little spaces for everybody to fit into, it just doesn't make sense to me. So, that's my opinion. Anyway, then there was a cross-pollination between fetish dressing and goth, and you had BDSM type stuff happening in goth clubs, which it sort of started out with the clothes, and then it kind of went further into the actual BDSM play in clubs. And personally, this sounded a death knell to me in a way, because I really did like having my two subcultures separated, because to me, if you're in the BDSM subculture, that might be something that is private in your life, and maybe you don't want everybody that you know to know that you're into that subculture, and it kind of outed people in a way that I didn't really like, and I didn't really want to be outed as a person who played in that arena, or as maybe a fetishist, because I'm really into corsets and boots and rubber and a lot of real fetishy stuff. And I was also into BDSM, and I just kind of wanted that to be private and separate from my gothiness or whatever. So then you had sort of like, well, fetish goths, and there's no such term as far as I know as fetish goths, but that sort of fed into the cyber goth thing more. So I think that's the industrial and the fetish side of the goth club kind of generated this cyber goth designation, and then you had to call the other goths something, so Romantigoth came out of that. And as soon as you had those two, it's a short step away from just classifying everybody. And I actually was kind of shocked when this happened, to be frank. All these little subcategories, I couldn't see what people would want to be labeled that way. So that's my opinion about how that all started. And I don't know, that's the best explanation that I can give of what I saw happen. The first time I really read about it anywhere was in Voltaire's book. I think it's called something like How to Be a Goth, or it's called What is Goth, or something like that. And I think the book's meant to be tongue-in-cheek, which is fine, but it explains what each kind of type of goth is or whatever, and I think it probably, it took off on the internet, and people doing these little quizzes to find out what kind of goth they are and all this sort of stuff. Personally, I think we should just not label ourselves anything. If you're a goth, you're a goth. Or maybe like Kitty says, you're alternative, and you should just stick to being alternative. And like I've said, I like the term bohemian. That to me means somebody who's living an unusual life, and I think that's a worthwhile pursuit. So anyway, thank you for listening. This has been Jwlhyfer's Gothic Bohemian Salon. Bye-bye.